Commodore fans, are you ready? It's time for another episode of the Vandy247 podcast on the 440 Sports Network. Keep it locked right here for the best Vanderbilt coverage. Whether it's Clark Lee on the gridiron, Mark Byington and Shea Ralph on the hardwood, or Tim Corbin on the diamond, the Vandy247 crew has you covered. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Also, like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. That's free and easy to do. Follow the crew on Twitter, Apple Podcast, and Spotify for podcast episodes. Lastly, if you're interested in sponsoring the show, email Chris Lee at chrislee70@gmail.com. And now, pull up a chair. It's time for another episode of the Vandy247 podcast.
Welcome back into Vandy247 Live alongside Joey Dwyer. I am Billy Derrick as we come to you on a freezing, frigid Thursday morning. I think it feels like 0 degrees outside, Joey. So stay warm, everybody out there. And I think the roads are a lot better. Yesterday, they obviously weren't great, but you should be good to get out and get on the move if you have to. But we hope you're listening to us as well. If you're driving around, if you're doing some chores or whatever, if you're working, check us out. We're going to be talking basketball today. We're going to do a deep dive into basically what Vanderbilt has to do down the stretch here. We know they need, perfect world, you get 3 more wins and you're a lock. But can they get in with 2? We're going to talk about that and maybe a weak bubble this year. So we'll dive into all that. Before we do, though, I want to tell you about the Wash House. They present our basketball coverage. If you're dreading laundry day and is it stealing time to do the things that you truly enjoy, let the laundry professionals at the Wash House take care of that for you. They've got 2 locations in Nashville. Just drop off your dirty laundry, and their professional attendants can give you back the one thing you can never have enough of, your time. Within 24 hours, you can pick up your nicely folded, fresh and clean laundry ready to be put away. Log on to washhouseclean.com or stop in today and get your time back. Joey, we're going to do all basketball today. Probably won't go too long. And again, we'll take your comments and questions if you got them. But I want to do a little deep dive into what this team has to do. We got all into last night, unless you have any more thoughts on last night. I did think it was interesting when I was scrolling through Twitter this morning and ran into a tweet that somebody sent me. I think it was a Vanderbilt fan on Twitter. And Ryan Shelton was his name. He said, Vandy was down by 2 against Auburn before the half. They lost by 22. Vandy was up by 1 against Florida before the half. They lost by 11. They were up by 4 against Oklahoma before the half. They lost by 30. They were up by 13 against Tennessee before the half. They lost by 5. They were down by 1, just 1 to Kentucky before the half. They lost by 21. So that's the theme of the season so far, Joey. And it's going to be really interesting to see if they can right the ship here down the stretch and change the way they've been playing. Now, the good thing is they've got 3 out of 5 home games. And, this team is a different team at home. So I think that's the encouraging part here.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. They haven't had adversity like this yet. Obviously, it's 3 really good teams that they lost to, and none of the losses I'm overly panicked about. But I do think it's worth noting that these are college kids, and they've lost 3 games in a row. And sometimes college kids don't respond well to losing 3 basketball games in a row, and sometimes that affects how the rest of the season goes, for better or for worse. And when they've been in make-or-break spots throughout the year, they've generally responded with a win. They've responded against Texas with a win. Felt like they had to get the South Carolina game early in league play. They got that one. So I don't have a ton of reason to believe that this will go sideways, but it is interesting because, Billy, frankly, this group is used to winning basketball games and winning them a lot and winning them abundantly. And they haven't done that recently. This is the first time they've really had their back against the wall, truly. And interesting to see kind of how this turns. I think Saturday, like the title of the video says, is a must-win game in a lot of ways. You've got to win that game. Obviously, you're going to have other opportunities, but having 4 straight losses at this stage with a few more difficult games ahead of you, really not a spot you want to be in, especially as a bubble team, Billy.
No, No, it's not. And you look at the net rankings this morning, Vanderbilt is at 44. They only dropped 2 spots, which is I guess par for the course, but I thought maybe 3, maybe 4. So
Mm,
again, they're hanging pat there in the net. And
mm.
I thought, Joey, you did a good job on the board this morning of explaining to a subscriber how number one, how weak the bubble is this year. And you pointed out just about every other team. What was the stat you pointed out? You said was it the quad three games
Let me pull it up.
that
It was
Vanderbilt's non-conference strength of schedule is definitely the worst out of pretty much every bubble team,
yeah.
right? But there was another stat that you brought up that pointed that was at the top among the other bubble teams.
Yeah, I actually went back last night and basically looked at the resume of every bubble team, as in the last 4 buys, last 4 in, first 4 out, next 4 out. Where Vanderbilt benefits is they are one of 7 out of those 16 teams that doesn't have a quad three or a quad four loss. They have the best wins above bubble ranking, which I think matters as well. And then in terms of the quad one and quad two games, I think that's where they could maybe see some trouble. Only 2 quad one wins versus West Virginia's got 5, Texas has 4, BYU has 4, San Diego State has 4, Arkansas has 3. The good thing for them though, quad two is helpful to them. They're 4-1 in quad two. So when you kind of combine quad one and quad two wins, they're in fine shape compared to the other ones. And also their net ranking is 7th out of the 16 teams as well. So I don't think the bubble is super scary for them this year. I think there is a path if they play even decent basketball down the stretch to where they could go and get in the tournament. I like Wake Forest's resume more than other people do. Obviously, only 2 quad one wins, but 5-0 in quad two, 6-4 on the road, 1 loss between quad three and quad four. Actually, they're the only team that has a better wins above bubble ranking than Vanderbilt does. But kind of besides the point, I think they're in fine position right now. Obviously, it's going to take a little bit more down the stretch, though, as we've kind of alluded to. They've got to get to 8. I think that's the magic number. And 7, I think as the days go by, you're generally thinking they have a better chance to get in with 7, especially if they win one at Bridgestone. But I don't think Vanderbilt wants to be in a spot where they have to rely on that. They've always kind of pinpointed 8 as the magic number, I think, inside the building. And that's kind of what they've got to do if they want to feel comfortable on Selection Sunday.
Yeah, and you brought that up too in your post and basically said, look, you could have 7 wins and feel okay, but you want to feel more than just okay. Going into the SEC tournament and then wrapping it up going into Selection Sunday. You don't want to be sweating out Selection Sunday. But you look at the schedule coming up. Obviously, this Saturday, Ole Miss comes to town. Ken Palm has Vanderbilt listed as a 43% chance to win that game. They got Ole Miss winning 77-75. And you go down the list. Obviously, take A&M out. These next 4 games, Ole Miss, Missouri, Arkansas, and Georgia are all winnable, and maybe even very winnable
Mm-hmm.
for this team. They've beaten they've beaten teams that that they have been supposed to beat this year. That you look
Mm-hmm.
at where LSU is now. Vanderbilt was supposed to beat them. They did. They supposed to beat South Carolina. They did. Supposed to beat Texas, right? We talked about them being better than Texas. They beat Texas. Now that was at home, right? Those, the only road SEC win this team has is at LSU. And so, can you go on the road against Georgia and kind of match that? You bookend your SEC slate with a couple of road SEC wins. You start it with at LSU and you end it with at Georgia. And you also mentioned how Georgia's resume is better than Vanderbilt's, and I would agree. And so that I keep looking at that last game. It's staring me down, Joey. Going that could
Mm-hmm.
be Vanderbilt's chance. That could be the deciding game. And you don't want to rely on one game, but a lot of times you do. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, if Vanderbilt, say they knock off Ole Miss on Saturday, and then they turn around and beat either Missouri or Arkansas at home, probably give them a better chance to beat Arkansas at home. Even Arkansas is really good,
Mm-hmm.
um, and going to be really tough. But you're at 7 wins going into Georgia. Probably need to beat Georgia. to
Yeah,
feel really good. I keep looking at that Georgia game and going, man, that that's going to be huge. But Clay chimes in and says it all rides on Ole Miss. I'm kind of with Clay. Like I know the Georgia game, it could come down to that, but the Ole Miss game is the next game on the schedule. But more importantly, if you lose this game, you fall to 5-9, and you put even more pressure on yourself to win the last three games of your season, and
mhm,
you don't want to have to do that to yourself. So really, you could argue it all rides on four of the last five games
yeah,
to see what happens.
for sure. I think Ole Miss is really important. I don't think it ends their season if they lose, but I mean, it puts a ton of pressure on them down the stretch. A&M, I think, is more winnable than people will give it credit for, but still, you're looking at a tough game there. In Georgia, you're going to have to play on the road. And going back to that, I think that's really important, right? Georgia, the big knock on Georgia's resume right now is they're also 1-6 on the road. Vanderbilt is 2-5 on the road, slightly better. But first of all, you need another road win, probably. You look at the rest of the bubble. San Diego State's 5-2 on the road. Arkansas is 3-4 on the road. Wake Forest 6-4. Texas 3-4. West Virginia 3. BYU 3. Just about everybody but Oklahoma, Georgia, and Vanderbilt on the right side of the bubble have 3 road wins. So I don't know that that's the end all be all. And I also think there's a little bit too much around this time of year put on head to head. Like just because Vanderbilt beat a bubble team in 22-23 didn't mean that they were even necessarily close to getting in the tournament. I think this might be a little bit different in terms of Georgia because they literally might be fighting for one of the last 2 or 3 spots in the tournament at that point. And if Vanderbilt can do it on the road, that would be huge. But I generally just look at that game as like it's important not only to beat a bubble team, but it's also important that you can go get a road win and prove that you can do that. Because one of their road wins too is Virginia Tech, and really we know that Virginia Tech team is not one to be flaunting a win over at this point. So
No,
I do look at that Ole Miss game as one that really matters, but I also look at it as a weird matchup for them too. So I initially thought it was a good matchup just because I don't think Malik Dia and Brown Jones are gonna really work them inside. I don't think those are guys that could get McLaughlin or carry in foul trouble a ton. They're not a great rebounding team, 208th in the country in defensive rebounding, 318th in offensive rebounding. But here's the thing Vanderbilt, what have they prided themselves on defensively throughout the entire year? Forcing turnovers. Ole Miss is number one in the country at not turning it over in offensive turnover rate. That's something to really worry
yeah,
about. They're also number one in non-steal turnover percentage. So they never throw the ball away. They never make mistakes on their own. Vanderbilt would be lucky to get anywhere near 10 turnovers out of Ole Miss in that game. That's what's allowed it to be so successful. And then even down the line, you look, Mizzou just beat Alabama last night. Mizzou could be a team that wins a lot of games down the stretch here. For a Southeastern 16 piece, Josh Gray, the Mizzou center, told me that they all think they can be a Final Four team and that people
yeah,
haven't really realized that. So, I mean, it's going to be tough. And I don't think just because they're not playing Tennessee, Kentucky, or Auburn that
yeah.
they're going to be favored in a lot of these games. They're going to really have to scratch and claw to get to 7 or 8. And that starts Saturday. It's the Malik Dia return game, but that's not the storyline here. The storyline is, man, they better go win that game because if they don't, you probably got to get 3 out of your last 4, or maybe 2 out of your
Yeah.
last 4 to have a chance. So it's a thrilling time of year, Billy. This is when basketball really matters and when people should be really paying attention.
Meaningful basketball in February. You can't. We haven't always been able to say that as people covering Vanderbilt. I know it's tense for Vanderbilt fans, but probably rather be in this spot as opposed to obviously where you were last year. And look, and we'll have plenty of time to talk about after the season. What this season means and where this program's at as a whole. But it's hard to pick at what they've done so far. Still, it really is. Now they've hit a tough stretch. This was always a tough stretch. I mean, like they went 1-5 in this stretch. If you look at it, yeah, Texas was the lone win. Lost to Oklahoma, Florida, Auburn, Tennessee, and Kentucky. If you would have told me that before this stretch happened, I would have said, yeah, okay. That's par for the course. That's a brutal stretch. But this is where the tables turn a little bit. 3 out of your last 5 are at home, and these teams are not. You made a good point, Joey. They're still really good teams. Ole Miss is a good team. Missouri's really good, and Arkansas is playing well. Georgia's good. We know about A&M, but they're also not Florida, Auburn, Tennessee.
Mhm.
Um, and you wonder. I'd like to see how many SEC teams had to play Florida, Auburn, and Tennessee in the span of 2 weeks.
Mhm.
And I know Texas was sandwiched in there, but that wears on you. That can wear on you. And they came close, but couldn't get it done. But now you turn the page, the comfort level probably ramps up. You go home. You go on the road to A&M. Nothing to lose. We'll see. But then 2 straight home games, Missouri and Arkansas. And to me, that's when you really realize what this team's about. That Missouri and Arkansas game. And look, Missouri's good. Missouri's really good. But Vandy's a different team at home. We've seen that, Joey. But one thing I did want to mention too is if you look at the SEC, Vanderbilt is still, Vanderbilt and Texas are kind of lumped right there together at the top of the bubble teams. All right, they're both 5-8. Arkansas and Georgia are 4-9. Oklahoma's got to be out of it, right, Joey? I mean, they're 3-10 now. I
It's
don't know where Lenardi has them, but
Yeah, Lenardi has them in the last 4 in. That's a really interesting resume to me.
which I don't get.
They're the lowest out of anybody but Wake Forest in the net. They have 5 wins between quad 1 and quad 2, which I guess is keeping them in there, but 1-6 on the road, 5-0 at neutral, which helps. 37 win above bubble, and then they have a quad 3 loss, and they are one of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're one of 7 out of the 16 that has a quad 3 loss. You'd think that would be something that hurts them as well. I generally think Vandy has a better resume than them, even with the head-to-head, which, again, I'm not a huge head-to-head guy when you're considering the bubble.
Yeah. So you're looking at the bubble in the SEC, Texas and Vandy there at the top. And you look at what Texas has coming up. They've got South Carolina on Saturday, which should be a win. They've got Arkansas on the road, a winnable game for them. Georgia's winnable. So manageable schedule for Texas. Texas is in a good spot.
Yeah, I think Texas
They
will be in.
Yeah, Texas. I mean, their schedule is not all that tough if you look at it. And
Mhm.
then we know about Vandy's. You look at Arkansas's. Arkansas's got Missouri at home on Saturday. Is going to be really tough. You got Texas again. That's winnable, but another bubble matchup. South Carolina, Vandy, Mississippi State, not brutal, right? I
Mhm.
think Arkansas is in a good spot. Georgia has a tough. Georgia's kind of with Vandy. Georgia and Vandy's got brutal schedules coming up. They've got Auburn on the road on Saturday, and then Florida at home next Tuesday. It lightens up a little bit with Texas, South Carolina, and Vandy. But these next couple of games might just knock Georgia's spirits out potentially,
Mhm.
potentially because that would drop them to 4-11, and they'd have to. I think that would, yeah, because they're 4-9 now. So yeah, Joey, that would drop them to 4-11. They'd have to win their last 3. That's tough.
Yeah.
So you don't know. You don't know who wins these games, and that's kind of the look at the bubble. But I did want to ask, and we do have some questions to get to here at the end, which we will. If Vandy gets 2 more SEC wins, and they get 1 in the SEC tournament, not on Wednesday but on Thursday, do you think they're in?
I would guess so. I just I look at it and I think the committee might even overcorrect for how difficult the league is. Like, I think they might be too kind to the SEC and the resumes because of the perceived difficulties of playing in the league, which Vanderbilt has seen recently. The Ken Palm actually has them at this number. It doesn't factor in the SEC tournament, but they have them at 19-12, 7-11. And I just remember a few years ago with the Big 12, how people were really worried about how teams like this with basically this exact resume we're getting in the tournament, and I don't see why this would be much different. I actually think this league is harder than the Big 12 was back in the Big 12's heyday. So I would guess they would be in. At that point, they would have probably 5 quad one wins. They'd be 4-1 on a neutral, and maybe would have a third road win. I think if you're really looking at it, though, I don't think they would be incredibly worried about the road win. I think the neutral would help them enough to where they'd be 4-1
Yeah.
on a neutral. I think that would help. The one thing here, and this is kind of the outlier variable, if you want to say, their non-conference strength of schedule is something that I think is going to stay with them the entire way. 345th in the country.
Mm.
If I did my math right, and I'm going to look back at this later, I think that is the worst out of any remaining bubble team,
Mm.
and that's been a precedent before where teams have been punished for that. The good thing for Vanderbilt, Georgia also has a bad one, and there's a few other teams on here. I can't think of which ones exactly. There's some teams with bad non-conference schedules that are on the bubble as well. So I don't think they're the only team in that boat, but I think it might have even been Wake Forest a few years ago who was really punished for that. And I think you're really wondering if they're going to set the precedent there and say, man, you have to schedule harder non-conference games. But I also wonder if there's some consideration for the effort that Vanderbilt put into the schedule. They went on the road to play TCU. Virginia Tech, I think they thought would be better. They went to an MTE that Byington thought would be really strong. He talked all offseason about how strong the MTE was and even said that before the weekend. And then it turned out to be a pretty weak field. So I don't know. I wonder what they think of the non-conference schedule and kind of how heavily they weigh that. That's something that I'm thinking about down the stretch here, and it's always kind of in the back of Vanderbilt's mind as well. I think because they thought they scheduled harder than they did, and I wonder if that comes back to bite them if they're right on the bubble.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. But this Saturday against Ole Miss is where it all starts. 2:30 at Memorial. We'll be there. I look at that matchup, and Malik Dia is a matchup concern, but I'm not anticipating him to go off for 20, 25 points. Maybe he does, but I mean, he's like if McLaughlin and Carey are in foul trouble, then that's when you start to think that could happen. But Ole Miss down low, they don't have an Amari Williams. They don't have a Akpara. They don't have a Janai Broom or Cardwell. They're not scary down low. Now, Brakefield and Dia are good players, and you have Mikhail Brown Jones too, who's 6'8". But Vandy can match up with them down low, Joey. They've got some shooters. Sean Padula can shoot the lights out. Jalen Murray as well. Matt Morrell. This is a good Ole Miss team, but they match up fine, and they're at home. I like the spot for Vandy. I'm not sitting here saying this is a lock for Vandy to win, but I like the spot and the matchup.
I don't think it's a terrible spot at all. The thing that worries me is the turnovers, and we talked about it a lot early in conference play. Like the free points are going to dry up for Vanderbilt in this game, and it's got to make shots at a higher clip. It can't do what it did last night against Kentucky. I think I saw Clay. I think it was him asked something about did Byington say anything interesting post game at the presser. I don't think it was anything super noteworthy, but I'll run over it real quick for him. He said, "I thought we got out of character. There were some good defensive plays, but we lost ourselves in the second half. We're just having trouble getting breaks sometimes in the second half right now. It feels like one thing goes against you, another thing goes against you, and we're having trouble getting it." I don't know what he meant by figuratively but he said we've got to turn our luck around. He said Kentucky didn't make a major defensive change. Thought they were finishing well in the first half, but Vanderbilt didn't do that in the second half. He said he highlighted that they went 12 of 19 on layups, and then he said, "I thought they were great tonight, as in Kentucky. In the first half, I thought we played at a high level, but we didn't maintain it in the second half." Didn't necessarily break any news. Didn't seem overly concerned, which I thought was interesting. He seemed to really be more worried about defending Kentucky's bigs and how Vanderbilt couldn't do that. That's something I've noticed with him in the last couple of weeks is you ask him anything about the front court and he's basically just throwing up his hands and is like, man, we're shorthanded there. There's nothing we can
Yeah.
really do. And I think he's right, but also it doesn't appear after these losses that there's an overwhelming message of like, hey, we got to get this back on track. It's more like we're trying our best and we'll see what happens here. And I generally think that's his demeanor, but I wonder if it's a little bit different behind the scenes after he watches the tape and everything. Nothing super noteworthy out of that, but I think heading into Saturday, there's got to be a sense of urgency with that game. And I'm not saying there won't be, but it's a really important game for them. And it's not just a Malik Dia return game. And Billy, I think that's another interesting story to say, though. Like, I don't think Malik Dia has any resentment towards Vanderbilt in a lot of ways. Maybe he does towards the old staff, but I think Malik Dia loves Vanderbilt. And I think that's going to be a guy where him and Tyron Lawrence, I think, are both going to be guys where they're going to win or lose their respective team the game against Vanderbilt. I think those guys are going to want to be the guys in those performances, and especially with kind of the way things ended with Malik and the Vanderbilt staff this offseason, where they essentially took Kajani right over him. I wonder if he tries to show him something, but I do think Malik Dia loves Vanderbilt, and I think he at one point last offseason envisioned himself with a chance to play for Vanderbilt this year, but obviously didn't work out. I think is largely as a result of the staff choosing Kajani Wright and his kind of player archetype over Malik Dia.
Clay asks, any guesses for what's up with Edwards' minutes?
That's why I wish I was there last night, so I could ask them about that. But yeah, that was something we talked about kind of at length last night, and it's like, man, he didn't play all that bad in the first half. I thought maybe the defense was worse than I imagined, but I mean, he was 3 for 8 with 7 points at halftime. That was, I think, second on the team. So, and then it just drastically went down. It had to be something defensive oriented, right?
Yeah, I mean, defensive. He did take a shot on Owe that got blocked.
Mhm.
I don't know. I honestly don't know what to say there. Clay says his best guess is he likes Huffman pressuring the ball, but couldn't MJ do that while providing more.
Yeah.
You
Another thing to note, he also really likes Huffman's size, like as a true point guard. That's something that he's really valued a lot of the season, and that's just kind of the message that he's given us throughout the year. Is even when Huffman's minutes went down early in SEC play, I asked him about him, and he was like, I envisioned those going up because he's a ball handler with size who can defend. I think he values those things more than the average fan, and at times even more than the scoring punch that some guys can give him.
Knox too tall. Why does it feel like we have nothing in the second half of games, yet our players aren't playing heavy minutes? I think that's a good question. I think the concept of having nothing in the second half is not fatigue, though. I think it's just this team has limitations, and they jump on teams in the first half with a good game plan. But at halftime, these teams are realizing, okay, we're bigger than Vanderbilt. We may not be more athletic, but we're bigger inside. In a lot of these games, Joey, they've thrown it inside, and they've taken more care of the basketball. Vanderbilt forces a lot of first half turnovers. Have you noticed that? Like they rip teams. They know they've got to do that, but it's hard to maintain that throughout 40 minutes. That style of play, teams look at it and go, okay, let's stop turning the ball over. Let's get it inside. We can beat this team. Like that. That's what it feels like. I don't think it's fatigue, really.
Yeah, I didn't really think it was ever fatigue, even though Byington said that once or twice. Maybe it wasn't those specific instances, but I feel like
Auburn,
they're just generally kind of searching for answers, I think. And it was interesting too. Byington said last night that he thought they made some scouting report errors in the first half, which I've never heard a coach admit. So good on him for doing that. But also, yeah, I think you're right. I think teams are just kind of wearing them down, and not in the terms of like fatigue, but it's like they're nickel and diming them to death in terms of throwing it into the post. Andrew Carr gets a bucket here, Amari Williams gets a bucket here, or they run a DHO off Amari Williams and the guy shoots it wide open. Just little stuff like that, I think, is wearing Vanderbilt down. And then I think at times, like some announcers have mentioned, their offense has turned into poor defense, which can't necessarily happen. I mean, also last night too, I thought the law of averages, and this was the Tennessee game too. Law of averages went in Vanderbilt's favor in the first half, and then second half it kind of regressed to the mean. I think that's something to note, but I wonder why that can't come in the second half rather than the first, because it seems like every time they've shot uncharacteristically well, it's been in the first half and not a second half.
Here's a good point from Willie. Vandy's 4-1 on neutral courts. Who did they beat? Seton Hall, Nevada, TCU, all bad teams. I think that's a good point, obviously. But
hmm
going into the season, I thought Seton Hall would be better. I thought Nevada would be better. I thought TCU would be better. TCU is actually okay if you look at them, but Seton Hall's awful,
hmm
and the other team, Nevada's not all that great either. So I think they got a little screwed with that, Joey.
Yeah, they're 3-1 on neutral, so I don't know if I misspoke earlier, but that's
Okay.
what it is. They are 3-1 on neutral, and then right, none of those are great wins. TCU's okay. Nevada's the one they thought would be way better. Byington
Yep.
told me that night that he thought Nevada was a Sweet 16 type team, and maybe he was exaggerating a bit there, but they yeah, they thought those games would be more impactful on their resume, and frankly, they just weren't, and that could come back to bite them. But I also think a lot of these MTE type games that these teams are winning on neutral courts kind of follow a similar pattern. MTEs are by design supposed to be strong just because they're putting in a bunch of Power Five teams and everything, but I think a lot of the time they don't end up being as strong unless you go to Maui, unless you go, I don't know, to some island. It's going to be pretty difficult to draw a good MTE. And I thought Vanderbilt, I know for a fact Vanderbilt thought they were in one of the stronger ones, and obviously they weren't.
What does MTE stand for?
Multi-team event, really,
Ah,
really
okay.
creative.
You were saying MTE, and I was like,
I
dang,
I
what
could have
is he
came up with
talking about?
I could have came up with that.
Clay, to wrap us up, if we lose Saturday, do the wheels fall off? I think there's decent chance they they do because I talked about the mental fatigue of this team right now, Joey. You lose Saturday, you go, uh-oh. Now we got to go on the road to A&M.
hmm
And then you got Missouri. You start looking ahead. Now I know Mike is doing everything he can to keep his guys from looking ahead. But the other thing, so it's going to be tough, and that's why I think it's so important. You got to stop the bleeding right here on this Saturday.
hmm
But the other thing I'm looking for with this team is, this is they're facing adversity right now, and we're going to learn what this group is made of, I think, on Saturday. Because if they lose, it's not going to be a good feeling because you're going to College Station. You're probably not winning that game. And like I said, I think the wheels could fall off a little bit. But if you
It's all
win,
yeah.
you bounce back. I think we're going to learn a lot about the makeup of this team.
Yeah, it's to me it's almost like it's like Jason Edwards in the first half. Like you got to see one go in, otherwise it's just why are we doing this? What is this process? Kind of I think something like Clark Lee has said for years. Like you've just got to see one go through, and that's what I think this Ole Miss game is bigger than a resume standpoint because they can go lose the Ole Miss game and they can have a fine resume by the time it's all said and done. They could go beat Georgia, they could beat Arkansas at home, and they would probably be right in the mix. But in that way, it's like you've got to have it just because you can't afford to lose that, and then A&M, and then maybe it starts to really spiral as a really good Missouri team comes to Memorial. This is make or break time. This is winning time, as Mark Byington would say, and Vanderbilt's got to be ready on Saturday. This is not like we've mentioned a lot. This is not just the Malik Dia return game. This matters, and this is a game that legitimately could make or break their season.
2:30 on Saturday, Ole Miss comes to Nashville. You can see it on the SEC network. We will both be there. We'll have full coverage. I would assume Byington talks tomorrow, and so we'll be able to get his thoughts on the matchup. And then next Wednesday at Texas A&M. So those are the next couple of games for Vanderbilt. Obviously, this Saturday, uber important for the Commodores. Appreciate all you guys hopping in today. Glad we're able to get on here live and talk a little hoops. Really appreciate you, Joey, for hopping on, and appreciate everybody for checking us out, and especially afterwards. after the fact on the podcast. Give us a review, 5-star rating. That helps us get noticed. If you're listening and haven't subscribed to Vandy247.com yet, please do. First month for $1. That's what the latest deal states right now. You can get your first month for $1 if you join Vandy247.com right now. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. That is free. Like this video. Keep the comments rolling. And if you're interested in sponsoring the show, email Chrisley at chrisley70@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you again soon with more episodes of the Vandy 24/7 podcast.